All right, time for another book review. I finished a really good book a couple nights ago, and I'm still reading The Divine Comedy. I'm about halfway done with Paradiso, and I will do the review of the last two books and kind of the overall entire book probably as my next video because I don't think I'm going to be finishing anything before then. But I was reading another book while I was reading that, and I started this book probably a year and a half ago. I think in the middle of the beginning of the pandemic, I did like a deep dive on all the Kurgan's videos, right? If you go into his YouTube channel and just sort all his videos from the oldest, I started from the very beginning, and he had a list of books he recommended, and this is one of them. I just finished it, and it was really good. Okay, so conclusion, great. Get it, read it. Okay, done. No, I'm just kidding. I've got notes for this video that I'm going to discuss, tell you what I learned a little bit without giving away everything. But I did want to highlight this, right? So I actually bought the Kindle version of the book. I discovered that while my now nearly 2.5-year-old was closer to 1, he was fun to stroll around, and while we were strolling, I could whip out my phone and read on the Kindle. So I had the Kindle book. About 2/3 of the way into this book a month ago, I decided this is definitely a book that I want to own in hard copy. And I do that, right? So if I read a book on Kindle that I really think is good, that I would want to read again or have one of my boys read or a friend read, I buy it in hard copy and put it on my bookshelf. There's a lot of them. In fact, I've got a whole collection of leather-bound books now about the Crusades and the history of Rome as well. A lot of that's Easton Press. I've got an addiction to Easton Press, and it's costing a lot of money, so I'm going to kind of chill off that. But I did order this right off of Etsy. This lady, Valerie Tyler Coe, was selling this kind of hard copy version of the book. It does look nice on the bookshelf, but the quality is garbage. These were made in the 70s, and the cover is halfway falling off. It looks a lot worse than even in that picture. So just be careful. Exactly. That's exactly it. That's exactly what it looks like. But it's nice to have a hard copy version of it nonetheless, if the person I lend it to or myself can take care of it. Maybe there'll be another issuance of this book, and unlike, it would be awesome to get a Castelia Library version of this book, I'm not going to lie. But even if Easton Press did one, I would probably buy it and then throw this hunk of junk out. But I did read the Kindle version, and real quickly, I will say the Kindle version is better because there are pictures. Like he or whoever made this associates some pictures from like archaeological digs and old black and white photos of like certain towns that were sacked by the Crusaders, and they put them in the book. There's a lot of cool little pictures. It's not like any kind of color artistic work. But there are some pictures and that are not in the hard copy book that I got. However, the hard copy book did come with this little page in the beginning that you can pop out, and I'm going to read it word for word. It's going to take a minute or two because it's worth it, and it does. I have to pretty much agree with what it says, but here it goes. For sheer narrative magic, Harold Lamb's books on events and personalities of Near East history are unsurpassed in the English tongue. Saturday Review comments. Quote, Harold Lamb has the storyteller's gift. He knows how to seize the vivid visual detail which calls to the imagination, how to marshal a hurrying crowd of anecdotes, heroic or romantic or absurd, into a significant order, how to maintain suspense from one sentence to the next. He has written for all of us who are still young enough to be stirred by wonder and courage, end quote. In the Crusades, Iron Men and Saints, Mr. Lamb has restored to life one of the most important and dramatic movements in history, when the warriors and adventurers of England and the continent streamed across the Mediterranean to free the sacred sites of the Holy Land from Muslim overlordship. Quote, say what we will, end quote, Lamb has written, quote, the Crusades will endure as cherished memory. We wonder at them. Perhaps we do not understand them. For to their own dark age, the Crusaders brought the fire of unselfish purpose. Around this fire they drew men from all lands, centuries before the first alliances of peoples in our modern world. They drained the cup of devotion, and if they tasted the dregs of shame, they knew also the exaltation of victory. They reached the summit of daring, end quote. The Crusades, Iron Men and Saints is an exciting and accurate chronicle of the First Crusade, of its great leaders, and surging masses of warriors and camp followers. The whole kaleidoscopic story is told with a wealth of picturesque detail and fast-moving incidents that make this book at once supremely readable and richly informative. So that was what they wrote in this little page that comes with that book. I agree 100%. It was a very fun read. Like, compared to the Divine Comedy, which I have to literally read with a study guide to make any sense of what's going on in it. You know, this is a narrative. This feels fun to read. It's hard to put down. I found myself reading way longer than I anticipated. And you're learning about the First Crusade. So let's talk about that. I got some notes here. So if you see them on the screen, by all means, but they're just notes, and I'm going to probably, elaborate. So one thing that I will say, and it's kind of interesting, right? But the Romans were involved. And when I say the Romans, I mean the Byzantines. A lot of people don't realize that while the Western Roman Empire mostly fell, which is like a debatable thing, apparently, according to my brother, the Eastern Empire, Constantinople, and the cities and states they controlled remained until the 1500s. So in essence, actual Romans and Rome itself maintained and stayed around until maybe 500 years ago when they were finally sacked by the Turks. The Romans of the East were of what is now called the Eastern Orthodox Christian religion. They were not Catholics. They were the Eastern Church. There was a schism in not only Rome itself, but in the church. They absolutely betrayed the Crusaders on several occasions. There was their emperor, Alexis, made a lot of deals with the Muslims. He took the Crusaders in and then backstabbed them by not actually coming to reinforce them when they needed it. And it was, truly shameful, especially because the rest of Europe, nations that basically didn't even have the same language, France, England, Germany, Belgium, or Flanders, I'll say, Italy, the Normans, all these people could barely talk to each other, and they were all allied and fought together. Meanwhile, Constantinople and the, quote, Romans were just shameful. They actually even wore purple garbs. Like, Alexis really was Roman. Sucks, though. It sucks. This book talks about a lot of really cool characters. My favorite one probably being Tancred. Just like, these guys were so selfless. All the things that happened in this book, like, you would never realize how many... it is probably estimated that 250,000 Europeans banded together for the march down into the Holy Land. How many times they were raided by Turks and other Saracens. How many times they starved for weeks, literally thirsted, they had to literally siphon the blood out of their horses to drink the blood to survive on multiple occasions. It was super hardcore. We have it so freaking easy in this modern age. We are so weak compared to these guys. But yeah, there are some really interesting characters. Some of the characters were more ambitious than others. Didn't even fulfill the promise of getting down to Jerusalem. In fact, some of these guys who were leaders and dukes and princes and whatnot, the second they found a town they liked, they sacked it and they claimed it for themselves in the name of the New Christendom, I guess. But I think Bohemond, if I remember correctly, was one of the Normans. If I remember correctly, he never made it to Jerusalem. He took Antioch, I think, or one of the towns near Antioch, and just said, "Hey, cool, I found my little town. I'm going to be a king here," and just chilled. So a lot of these guys, while most of them were selfless, warrior pilgrims that were trying to get down to Jerusalem, which they did eventually take and controlled for maybe 100 years, something like that, 70 years. A lot of them gave up and were like, "Cool, I've done enough. I've got my town now. I've got my little kingship," and turned out to be a lot more ambitious. There were some really cool stories. I'll just say, when you read about the Battle of the Lance, it will be amazing. There's a vision that one of the Crusaders had. He had an apostle come and visit him in his vision. Really, really wild stuff. The book is really focused on the First Crusade. It does mention the Second and Third Crusade, I think maybe even the Fourth and Fifth, in a very small portion towards the end. but it's really focused on the narrative and the details of the very first crusade. Um, there's a few other things that I definitely want to talk about. One is being someone who watched the first few seasons of Game of Thrones. If you've seen that show or read that book, you know about wildfire, which is like this green fire that, God, I think feel like the Lannisters and King's Landing had to burn the fleet of Stannis. It is, if you saw it in the end of season 2, that is a real thing. The Byzantines had that. I don't know if it was green, but they literally came up with an alchemical formula for a fire-based kind of napalm that literally could not be put out by water and just burn through everything. It's very, very similar, as well as being used in naval battles. They had ships that could actually have like animal statue heads with their mouths open, mounted on the front of the ships, shooting this stuff out. Like, pretty awesome. So that's real. Let's see. One thing I will touch on here, the book does discuss the Templars and the Hospitalier, so some of the first few orders of knights that came out of all this. When the Crusades ended, there were those who definitely wanted to dedicate their entire lives to fighting in the Holy Land and dying by the sword. So that was the Templar and the Hospital. If you don't know about the history of the Templar, they basically got Order 66 in 1307 by the Pope and the corrupt King of France. They conspired. It was pretty messed up. They said that the Templar did some sacrilegious shit. We'll never really know, but the Templar were supposedly destroyed in 1307 on October 13th, Friday. Friday the 13th actually comes from that day. A lot of rumors and legends about where they went. Some say they went up to Scotland. Some say they got on their ships, went to the Americas, like what's it called, Oak Isle in Canada. The treasure that's down there supposedly is a Templar treasure. Some say that they went east into Switzerland. I kind of like to believe that. If you look at the Swiss flag, it's an inversed white, red. It's a white cross on a red background, which is the inverse color of what the Templars would wear, as well as being really notorious bankers, which the Templar were the very first bankers in European history. The Hospital actually became the Order of Malta, and the Order of Malta is still around today. In fact, when I used to live in Oakland, there was an office. They had like a little center where you could get medical care. To join them, you have to be Catholic. But I will say that they actually do exactly the opposite of what the old order did. The Order of the Hospital, they were knights. They fought with swords. They dedicated to healing people, so they would heal the people they wounded. They would heal other pilgrims. But they most certainly also defended the Holy Land. They didn't just help the invaders get into the area, which is what the Order of Malta does today. They literally help ferry the modern-day Saracens into Europe, which is terrible. So, cucked. Completely cucked. I think we talked about that. Let's see. The notes section at the end had some very interesting anecdotes told from the perspective of one of the Muslims who was allowed to live in Jerusalem. And that is to say that these Crusaders, they did a lot of bad stuff, guys. The book does talk about, taking towns and taking the women, if you know what I mean. And a lot of the Crusaders did exactly what the Muslims do. They're rapers. It was a thing. I mean, all war was like that, and I don't want you to think the Crusaders were all super holy and didn't do that kind of stuff. They most certainly did. There was one battle where even the Christians of a town in Syria were slaughtered. They're just the rage that these knights were feeling. They just could not be stopped. But when it was all said and done, they did live with a lot of Muslims in peace under Christian rule, and there were plenty of Muslims who were allowed to live in Jerusalem. And one of them has this section at the end of the book that he tells a lot of cool anecdotes. Probably one of the coolest parts of the last chapter. He does indicate that for the most part the Europeans were just super tough fighters. They had an unbreakable will, an unbreakable spirit in this first crusade. The later Crusades did not have that unbreakable spirit, unfortunately. They were much more political, much more ambition-driven, whether it was the papacy or the kings and princes that were involved. And they mostly failed, honestly. Only the first crusade is the one that really, truly succeeded. If I'm not mistaken, They held Jerusalem for about 60 to 70 years under Baldwin, and then his son Baldwin II. I can't remember who had it when Saladin eventually took it, and I don't think the Christians have ever had Jerusalem since then. The next book that Harold Lamb writes about the Crusades, which I do intend to read, is called The Flame of Islam, which most definitely discusses Saladin, who is a huge figure in the Crusades, but on the Arab side, the Muslim side, he was their leader. They all rallied around him. He united them, and they took Jerusalem back. So this was a very, very cool book. One thing I'm going to say, I've got a mother-in-law. She has intense amounts of white guilt, Catholic guilt. I have none. She has a full tank. I would love it if she read this book. Look, for the most part, the First Crusade was a good thing. It was mostly just. Without it today, folks, we would not exist. There would be no U.S. Constitution, no Magna Carta. Our timeline itself would not exist. We'd all be part of like a larger Muslim world. Our great 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 grandmas would have been raped, and our great 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 grandfathers would have been killed. I am not ashamed to live in this timeline, and this timeline that we live in has a lot to do with this crusade, but also Charles Martel, who I believe was the grandfather of Charlemagne, who really did prevent the Muslims from incursion into continental Europe, at least 12 or 1300 years ago. It is very sad that what's happening today is we're just letting them in. Our culture, our ancestors fought so hard to retain Christian rule in the Holy Land around Jerusalem and Nazareth, and have all these Christian holy sites and relics be under our control. And now, what are we seeing? That the world is not peaceful, that these people who come are not peaceful. Look how many churches are burning every single month. I think something like 900 churches have been burned and demolished in France alone. It's really, really sad. I don't want to end it on a bad note. I actually do have hope. The corner that we get pushed in, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a fresh crusade all over again, and we find the unbreakable spirit of the nations. But yeah, all in all, a really good book. Hope you enjoyed my opinion and my research on it. I do believe the next video will be about the Divine Comedy from Castalia Library. And with that, have a great day.